All right, Josh, take it away.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, 2 a.m., depending on your time zone. Welcome to the September 27th, Kubernetes community meeting. The usual caveats apply. Please mute your microphone if you are not currently the one speaking. And this meeting is being recorded, so don't say or share anything in this meeting that you don't want to belong to the entire public. Okay, so for today's community meeting, with the original demonstrator had to cancel or rather postpone. They will be rescheduled for later on in our schedule, which means that we are going to go straight to release. Tim, you there? For the 1.12 release.
Yes, I am here. Not too much to say other than the release is going out today. The final bits are building now. I'd expect that they should be published by around 5 p.m. Pacific today. It takes some time for stuff to ripple through. Other than that, Pengfei Ni, Feisky on Slack or Feiskier on GitHub is the 112.patch manager, and any issues that happen to arise in 112 need targeted for cherry pick there, and obviously for a 1.12.1 ASAP as things come up. And that's it. The bits are headed out the door.
Okay, and we'll be having a retro next week, yes?
Affirmative, yes. So in this meeting next week, we'll be doing a retrospective on the 112 process, looking at things we can continue doing better and improve for the next release.
Okay, can you add the retro link to the notes there? And for anybody who is involved and has comments. Actually, before we go further here, can I have a volunteer to take notes? Somebody wants to take notes for this. This will probably be your easiest community meeting ever to take notes, because we had a whole slew of cancellations today.
I'll volunteer since I'm pasting stuff in the minutes right now.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, as far as I know, there are no updates this week to 1.10 or 1.11. However, we have the last update for 1.9 coming out. Is Mehdi here? He wasn't sure if he could make it because this is a really bad time of day for him. Okay, I'm guessing that Mehdi is not with us. So he sent along to me. So in addition to 1.12 being released today, 1.9.11 is going to be released today. That will be the final update to version 1.9. So if you had a patch to get into 1.9, oops, too late. And everybody who is currently using 1.9 should really be planning on doing a cluster upgrade sometime soon, because we will no longer be issuing updates to it. That is the closure for 1.9, and after this, the active releases become 1.12, 1.11, 1.10. Okay, thanks. So, kind of almost in lieu of a demo, Aaron Krickenberger is going to take us through a bunch of the stuff for analyzing your test fails, all of the graphs and everything else. So this should be extremely valuable to any of our code contributors. Aaron?
Cool. Thanks, Josh. Aaron Krickenberger here, aka Aaron of SIG Beard, aka Aaron, friend of the pod, aka Aaron of SIG Testing. All right, so let's talk about test failures. I'm going to share my screen. These links are available in the meeting notes if you want to follow along. Let's see, that's the wrong screen to share. Let's try this again. Sorry about that. We're going to try this screen. Cool. Okay, so I have been trying to troubleshoot this extremely valuable dashboard not working for the past couple of days. It's finally up and running, so I thought it would be worth refreshing everybody's memory on what this is. Also, I'm just going to apologize up front if I drop out randomly. My internet connection seems to be unstable, so apologies for that. So this dashboard goes through and takes a look at every build and every test failure over the past week. It then clusters together the failure texts, so things like this, across all tests, and tries to identify clusters of similar failures that happen across different tests and across different jobs. The red lines here represent failed tests, and the blue lines here represent failed. One build could fail, but it could contain multiple failed tests. What we see here is a great example of a bunch of recent failures happening. This is also going to give me a chance to demonstrate doing it live, because I think other pieces of our test infrastructure are a little busted. But loosely speaking, the way this operates is it runs a bunch of BigQuery data. It expects that BigQuery data to get there by way of a utility that scrapes everything out of GCS buckets. Using that BigQuery data, we can then see that something started failing here around September 27th. So I can click on the latest failure, but before I do that, I can also click these drop-down arrows to see like what jobs has this failure been occurring in, with these little spark lines that show like, yeah, this definitely started happening recently across all these jobs. And then there seems to be like sporadic failures in other jobs over the past week. I can also see which tests this failure seems to happen in. In this case, it looks like they're all admission webhook related. Other links that I have available to me are I can search GitHub for this. So if I click this link button, this gives me a direct link just to this triage cluster. If I search GitHub, I can maybe see if somebody has helpfully filed an issue with a reference to this. And in fact, I filed an issue saying the test grid is stale. We'll show that shortly. So this has been, we have tried in the past to have a bot automatically file like the top 10 of these clusters in the hopes that somebody would actually fix them. That generally hasn't worked well in the past, but this can be an incredibly useful tool for people who are on the release team or the CI signal role to identify what's going on, where is it happening, so on and so forth. Other things I can do with this tool, if I take a look at this admission webhook thing, that's the test that's failing. I could post that in the test button, hit enter, and then that will show me all of the different failures that are happening in the test named admission webhook. It's actually like a regular expression, right? So I can see there are actually numerous failure clusters that seem to be occurring within this particular test. But most of them kind of look like this. I can also do the same thing for if I want to see everything that's happened in jobs related to like container D. Again, it's a regular expression, so all of the failure clusters I see here are failure clusters that are known to contain at least one of the container D jobs. You'll also notice the checkboxes up here show that I'm only looking at failures that have happened in the CI jobs. These are the jobs that are continuously running periodically after pull requests have been merged. So I can also use this checkbox here to include failures that have happened from pull requests, or to look at just the failures that have happened in PRs, which, okay, that's weird, this doesn't look right. Oh, right, we're not running container D jobs in PRs. All right, that looks a little better. So follow me through the trail of woe that is, oh, look, this is the top failure. Let's try and chase down what's happening and see if I can be helpful. So I'm gonna click on the latest failure that has happened in this failure cluster. Clicking that link will take me to the Kubernetes page. So Kubernetes, just to remind folks, is the place where I can see all of the artifacts and logs for a given job run or test run. This has taken me directly to the failure text for the test that's failing, including the command that I can use to run to reproduce the test locally if I happen to have a Kubernetes test cluster, a link I can click to see the standard out and standard error from the test log at the time it was happening, so on and so forth. If I then scroll up here, there are two links that seem to be kind of useful from my perspective. One is clicking the name of the job will usually send you back to the test grid dashboard for that job. And then if I click the recent runs link, that will take me back to Kubernetes view of having scanned back through the previous buckets. the problem I'm facing right now, oh, look, actually it's back up to date. So now that I've clicked on test grid, I can see that, wow, look, all of these admission hook things have failed and been failing since 927, or actually since sometime here in 926. So the next thing I could do is try and see if there's a difference between these two. You'll notice I'm flipping back and forth between the columns here. I know we need to work on labeling what these columns are, but the larger one here is most likely the version of code that corresponds to the version of Kubernetes under test. And so unfortunately, that hasn't changed across these. So it must be something else environment related. So this is just an example of how I can use triage to kind of quickly troubleshoot what's going on. I could now do this process against a variety of other jobs. The bug I was going to show you is that this view seems to be out of date in comparison to Kubernetes view, where Kubernetes also lets me walk back through previous test results. According to Kubernetes does like a slightly different way of looking at things, where it bounces back through BigQuery, it bounces back through GCS, whereas I believe TestGrid takes some of its results out of BigQuery. So some of the fun issues I've dealt with in the past, let's find it here, are that sometimes triage will fall wildly out of date. You can see this with this line up here, where it'll tell you builds from such and such a date to such and such a date. And sometimes this date is like wildly in the past. Where do I go to figure out what's happening when I see that that is stale? The first thing I can do is take a look at the job that is responsible for running all of the BigQuery stuff. We have since updated that job to dump its logs into GCS and be visible on TestGrid the same way most of our jobs are. I can click on one of these. I can then take a look at the build log. I'll just take a look at the raw build log. And you can see how this job is authenticating itself, setting up BigQuery, and then it's running these BigQueries things. It's running a Python script based on the outputs of those BigQueries. The data set that it's hitting for all of this is publicly accessible. So this is much like the publicly accessible GitHub data set in BigQuery. Anybody can query this. It's just that it gets charged to your Google Cloud account, and you get a bunch of free usage right out the gate. So you can see it's going through all of the different tests and clustering them together in based on the number of failures in the test, and so on and so forth. The code responsible for doing all of this stuff is here. You can see that we're kind of lacking on docs in this. This has been around for about a year and a half. Trying to see if we can make this a little bit more useful for folks. Finally, I talked about how this does stuff with BigQuery, and that there's something that's responsible for scraping data out of GCS into BigQuery. That thing is called Kettle. We've since set up a metric that shows us the ingress rate of data into BigQuery from GCS, and then we can see that there are gaps of time sometimes where our Kettle job ends up freezing or pausing, and so we have an alert set up in Velodrome. We also have a similar test grid job that's responsible for going through and verifying that the BigQuery tables are at least 6 hours up to date, and they start failing and going red. We're then going to hook this up to TestGrid's alerting, where, for those of you who don't know, you can set up TestGrid to send emails to an address if there are more than n failures in a row. And n can be configured differently for different jobs or different dashboards. I think that's all that I have for today. Any questions? Okay, cool. Hopefully I didn't pause or skip too much during all of that, and look forward to seeing more of us use this during the 1.13 release cycle. Thanks a bunch. Back to you, Josh.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for all of that. I kind of feel like those of us who are not on test infra have no idea the sort of depth of the various tools and graphs and interfaces. Okay, so we are now up to SIG updates. George, could you share the SIG update schedule grid? So I wanted to remind everybody of this. It's linked from the notes for the Kubernetes community meeting. And that is the schedule for future SIG updates that we're expecting. We want to get an update from each SIG at least once a quarter. These updates are really important for the rest of the community to know what your SIG is working on. I go ahead and then share them out through LWKD, and they go in the notes and they go in the video, because there are lots of people who don't necessarily participate in your SIG meetings and care about those SIG meetings. So please do take a look at this grid for when your SIG is delivering their next update, so that you don't get in the position of having somebody from contributor experience contact you 3 days before the community meeting and say, oh, we have to do that. So by the way, so next week is the retrospective. And then after that, we're going to get updates we should get updates from service catalog, instrumentation, and network. So this is kind of a notice to those 3 SIGs that if you could prepare something next week, then there's no last minute throwing stuff together. So thanks, and do keep track of that. And if you can't do a particular week, then please let us know on SIG contributor experience, and we will shuffle the schedule around. Okay, so that said, let's do a couple of SIG updates. First up is SIG Big Data with Yinan Lee, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes.
Okay.
So, okay, so let me share my screen first. All right, can you see the slides? Cool. Well, the major thing I want to talk about, but by the way, this is Yinan on behalf of SIG Big Data. So the major thing I want to talk about is the upcoming Apache Spark 2.4 release, which has some new feature for the Spark on Kubernetes. So
it's not gone.
Okay, yeah, so I think it's fine. So for that, so the release branch for 2.4 has already been cut, and the release process has been kicked off. So I think the estimated time when the release it will go out is sometime around October, maybe mid or to late October. So that's when the 2.4 release will be officially out. So these are the new features for Spark on Kubernetes in 2.4. So we now have support for Python and R. So these are long requested features from the users. So client mode is also a very popular feature that users have been requesting. So the client mode support will allow users to run things like Spark Shell or notebooks like Zeppelin or Jupyter. So it also comes with support for mounting a few types of volumes. Things like their host paths and PVCs can be supported now. It also has better finer grained control on the memory request for executor pods. So previously, the only thing supported is integer values for executor memory request. Actually, so executor cost, not memory, so CPU requests. So now you can actually use fractional values or MIDI CPUs, like what you would usually do with Kubernetes. There's also some enhancement to the scheduler backend code that makes it more robust to failures talking to the API server, for example. So in terms of roadmap or future work, so these are the things we're working on or plan to work on. The first one is there's actually some work in progress to make it possible to use a pod template to customize the driver and executor pods. So the reason why we wanted this is because the Spark configuration model is like you have a lot of Spark config properties to configure each aspect of, for example, the driver or executors. So with so many different options that you can actually configure the pods, we are facing a problem of explosion of the number of Spark config properties. So we decided to stop adding more new config properties. Instead, it was just allow user to pass in a pod template, so they can actually use that to customize the driver or the executor pods as they want. So the community is also working on a new shuffle service design to support dynamic resource allocation. So dynamic resource allocation in Spark allows you to actually grow or shrink the number of executor pods at runtime based on the load. So we're also working on kernel support for example, to access secure HDFS in Spark. We also plan to work on support for local application dependencies that are usually on your local submission client machines. So right now, users have to find a way to either bake those into the images or upload them to somewhere like a remote HDFS cluster or GCS or S3, whatever. So then have Spark download these remote dependencies locally. So we want to get better support for these local dependencies. There's also has been some discussion around providing redundancy for drivers pods for streaming applications. Well, so this is really critical because for streaming applications, if for whatever reason the driver restarts, it needs to restore from some checkpoint data, so it knows where it has left. So and also knows where to start with. This is very important for streaming application. Well, the other thing is for streaming application, you need to make sure that the new driver pod has exactly the same name as the old one. So from a user's perspective, they don't see that as a completely new submission, but rather something that restores from some checkpoint. Yeah, these covers the Spark aspect. So we also do collaborate with other open source projects like Airflow. So I think some of these have already been covered maybe in a previous update, but just to be sure, everyone knows what's going on here. So in Airflow 1.10, we have the new Kubernetes operator and Kubernetes executor for running tasks in arbitrary pods. There's also a Kubernetes Airflow operator in a Kubernetes sense. It's sort of like a Kubernetes customer controller with a CRD for managing the lifecycle of Airflow deployments. This is also open source. So we also have a project called Spark Operator. So this is also a custom controller with a CRD for managing the lifecycle of Spark applications. So this project received some new features as well. So one of the big features is now it supports automatic setup for exporting driver and executor metrics to Prometheus using the Prometheus JMX exporter. So I think that's all from SIG Big Data.
Well, I think that's plenty. Wow. Okay, well, thank you very much. If you have questions, you can ask it in chat. In the meantime, we're going to get a SIG update from Shyam about SIG Scalability, who've been busy this week with the release. Oh, yeah. Please paste that slides link into the notes if you can from Tim. So, Shyam, you ready?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Okay. So I think the last update for SIG Scalability was given sometime in early August. And since then, we've been working on a bunch of different things in a few different areas. Firstly, in governance, I think the biggest milestone was that we finally have a SIG Scalability charter. And this has been a work that's been happening for a while now. And I think this is a really big milestone for SIG Scalability because often we enter into like these discussions close to the release of how are we going to deal with scalability issues? Are we going to like block the release on them, or are we going to neglect them, and things like this? So finally, we have an official rule book of what we are able to do and what we are not able to do. And the other thing is with respect to the CNCF migration of scalability infrastructure. So we've identified a bunch of things with respect to the testing infrastructure and all the resources that SIG Scalability consumes right now. And there's been a plan laid out. It's part of a GitHub issue. I can find that, which basically identifies the areas and the work items to be done before we are ready to send this stuff over to CNCF. And besides those, we've been working on some newer areas. One of them is about networking SLIs. So it's for a long time now, I think more than 2 years, or maybe even 3 years, we've just lived with 2 SLOs in Kubernetes, 2 performance SLOs. And one of them was the API call latency SLO, and the other is the pod startup latency SLO. And we are starting to have discussions and proposing new SLIs in different verticals. The first one is with networking, and Wojtek has been working on this, and this should have been published on the SIG under community repository under SIG Scalability. So we have a bunch of new SLIs for networking, and we want to soon start to monitor those. And besides that, there has been some progress that we made on cluster loader version 2. I think I mentioned about this in the last SIG update. We finally have a MVP for cluster loader, and it has all the plain vanilla features that we need to be able to run our performance tests. So we have our density and load test now running on cluster loader on CI. We haven't yet migrated all the jobs to it yet, but we have a prototype which says that it's possible to run those tests on cluster loader. And hopefully this opens up avenues for a lot of other teams and developers wanting to scale test their features to be able to do it, to be able to easily do it using this tool. It's part of the perf tests repository, and there's also documentation there about it. And with respect to CI health and our tests, I think there have been mainly 2 things. One of them is speeding up our scalability pre-submits, which was kind of a technical debt that we got onto ourselves back when we added these pre-submits a while ago, I think more than a quarter ago. The scalability pre-submits were the slowest one, so they were like kind of the bottleneck for the merge throughput. So we are working on I don't actually remember the exact numbers, but we kind of sped up the slowest pre-submit, which I think is kubemark 500 pre-submit by 10 minutes. Earlier, it was something like somewhere between 1 hour 20 to 1 hour 20 minutes to 1 hour 30 minutes. And now it's about 1 hour 10 minutes, which is like 10 minutes slower than the slowest pre-submit that we had earlier. And also we've been investing significantly on deflaking some of our scalability jobs. And if you look at the test grid at our 5,000 node performance test, which is the most notorious scalability job we have, it has had 8 green runs consecutively now, which is kind of something that came out of this deflaking effort. And it's still going on. Yeah. Besides that, I think the other main area is fixing scalability issues with the release. And we did actually end up, like always, seeing a bunch of scalability issues close to the release. One of them was with the performance of node controller with writing taints to nodes, and there was an inefficiency in the design or the way in which the taint controller was implemented, which made cluster startup time really, really slow. This is now been fixed, and yeah, and that was followed by another more serious issue, and this was with core DNS. This kind of came up a couple of weeks ago. The sad part about the core DNS regression being caught so late into the release, it's because of that these scalability regressions that we've been seeing over the last 1 month kind of masked these kind of issues. So while we were fixing the other issues like this, the one with node controller, and there are a bunch of other things with, this is another regression with controller manager. This basically ended up masking the regression with core DNS. And by the time we fixed the others, it was a bit too late, which kind of it made us revert core DNS from being the default. And but SIG Scalability is right now working with the core DNS folks to help them scale test some of the fixes they've been proposing. So hopefully that should be better now. Yeah, I guess that's all I have on my side.
Okay, thank you very much for pitching in to do that. So scalability stuff. Let me again add an appeal for performance geeks in the community. I know that SIG Scalability could always use more performance engineers. So if you were looking for something to do to contribute to Kubernetes, consider joining them. Okay, well, thank you very much. So that's it for SIG updates for this week. Again, no SIG updates next week, but 2 weeks from now, we have several SIGs coming up. Please do look at yourself on the schedule and make sure that your SIG is prepared or rescheduled. So now some announcements. So Paris, you want to do the steering committee election announcements, or George?
I'm here.
Okay.
All right. Everyone who is eligible to vote, you officially have less than 1 week to do so. We close at 6 p.m. Pacific time on October 3rd. One more time, 6 p.m. Pacific, October 3rd is the last time you can vote for the 3 slots that are up for grabs on the steering committee election. Check your email for the CIVS ballot. That's a Cornell voting service. It's titled Poll Kubernetes Steering Committee Election for 2018. If you have any questions about not getting a ballot, etc., or any questions whatsoever, please feel free to email us at any time at community@kubernetes.io. The voter's guide is in there as well, and that has information on everybody that's running, our process, policies, etc. It looks like I've got the next one too. The next thing is we do have a contributor experience survey that is circulating around, links in the agenda. This survey is going to shape this special interest group's direction go forward, at least for the next 4 to 6 months. You all are contributors that are listening to this right now. It would be great to have your feedback, things like automation, mentoring, how we communicate. All of this is on that survey. And yes, if you would give your email at the end, we will happily grace you with a Kubernetes water bottle. It is a 10 to 15 minute long survey. It is exhaustive. This is helping us close a lot of feedback loops to get everybody on the same page. Next one's also me. SIG chairs, leads, tech leads, keepers of Zoom licenses, people who upload YouTube videos. Please check your email for issues relating to those 2 services. We have still about 40% of SIGs and working groups that are not using the correct Zoom license. And we have quite a few of you who are missing many past recordings of your meetings on YouTube, which makes us not as transparent as we should be. So please definitely check those items, and we are happy to help in any way. Please reach out to community@kubernetes.io, and we'll help you there as well. Guess the next one's me too. Contributor Summit for Seattle. Right now we have a waitlist issue. We are not sold out. I repeat, we are not sold out. There is a registration technical issue that we're working through right now. We may be pulling out of the KubeCon co-located registration process completely. However, if you've already signed up, that does not affect you. You will not be affected by any new process if you've signed up already. Again, if you are waitlisted, please continue to be waitlisted and we will contact you as soon as possible. The Contributor Summit Slack channel is where you'll get all live information. And of course, we have a GitHub page and also a co-located page on the KubeCon site that will be updated as we go as well. But if you're looking for absolutely real-time information, Slack will be your best bet. There's also a draft agenda for the content. We're looking for feedback on the sessions and content that you'd like to see. Right now we have between 13 to 15 proposed sessions. We're looking for anywhere between 2 to 5 more. This is your chance to say how you would like to make this day valuable for you. And that's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Wow. Okay, a lot of stuff. But we can finish up with some shout outs. So a shout out from Dims to Jonas for launching Cloud Native Boston. A shout out from Tim to the whole release team, from Timothy St. Clair to the whole release team and everyone else who put in a crazy effort to make the RC2 release and actually the final release today, presumably. Aish gives a shout out to Stephen Augustus for helping staff the 113 release team. And Stephen Augustus gives a shout out for everybody who volunteered. We actually have quite a few volunteers for the 1.13 release team. I'll tell you, as a task lead, one of my difficult tasks is going to be turning a couple of those people down, which I haven't quite figured out how to do yet. But there's a limit to how many people I can mentor. So that's awesome. I almost think we should create a position called Release Team HR and assign it to Stephen, because that seems to be his de facto position. And then a shout out from Aaron to Cole Wagner for all of the work that he's done to kill off the mungers and make Tide live for merges instead of using mungers. So yay. So thanks so much. And as a reminder to everybody, we do these shout outs every week. So if you have a shout out for somebody else, post it in the shout outs channel on Slack, or email contributor experience, I guess. And we will include those because lots of people do amazing stuff for the project. And that is all for this week's community meeting. The recording will be on YouTube. And next week, we will have the retrospective for the 112 release. So see you next week.
Happy Thursday, everybody.